This is a story. Red Thought, Blue Thought. Scientific Stories by Caribbean Uncle Joseph J. It's called The Taste Test Adventure. Once upon a time, in a cozy kitchen filled with jars of colorful spices and stacks of recipe books, Aunty Caren and Professor Walker were preparing for a very special experiment. Aunty Caren loved to cook and always encouraged trying new foods. Professor Walker, with her thick glasses and a tiny notebook, loved conducting experiments to learn about the world, just like children do all the time. Did you know that children are kind of like small scientists? Or that scientists are like big children? You can Google Alison Gopnik and read about her book, Scientists in the Crib. But let's talk about today. Today, Aunty Caren and Professor Walker had invited a group of young adventurers, young scientists. Who are they? They're you. You're the young adventurer and scientist to join in experimenting with the world of flavors. Aunty Caren said, "Today, we're going to learn something amazing," as she laid out a huge amount of food on the table. What was there? There were juicy strawberries, crunchy broccoli, creamy hummus, and even some mysterious green soup. Professor Walker adjusted her glasses. "We aren't just going to taste these foods. We're going to... What are we going to do? We're going to experiment! And we'll use our two thought tools. Our tools for thinking and experimentation. What are our tools? We have one tool. It's called a red thought. We have a second tool. It's called a blue thought." "What's a red thought?" asked one curious child. David asked, "What's a red thought?" "Ah, David, a red thought," said Aunty Caren, "is what you think right away." "A red thought," said Aunty Caren, "is what you think right away, without giving it much of a chance." David said, "What's an example of a red thought, Aunty Caren?" "Good question, David." Aunty Caren said, "A red thought is like saying, 'Ew, I bet that broccoli tastes gross,' even before you even tried it." "What's a blue thought?" Ada asked. "A blue thought," explained Professor Walker, "is your second thought. Your second thought is when you pause and think, well, what if this broccoli actually tastes pretty good? I won't know it until I try it." Blue thoughts help scientists and taste testers discover the truth. Do you all see how blue thoughts help scientists discover what's actually true? The children nodded eagerly, ready to begin their adventure. David, Ada, and who else? You tell me, who else is in this pack of children? Is it you? Is it your friend? Tell me the names of everyone who's on this adventure. The experiment begins. First, Aunty Caren offered everyone a slice of strawberry. One child, Ada, wrinkled her nose. "Strawberries look squishy. I bet they're weird and sour." Was that a red thought or blue thought? That was her red thought because it was her first thought. She didn't actually test it. She didn't experiment. "Aha," said Professor Walker. "Write down that in your notebook. Red thought. Squishy, weird, and sour. But before you decide, let's test it. Let's experiment." Ada took a tiny bite of the strawberry. Her eyes lit up. What is Ada gonna say? She said, "It's sweet and delicious. I love it." That was her blue thought. Everyone clapped because Ada went from red thought to blue thought by testing out how the strawberries tasted. Next, Aunty Caren held up a piece of broccoli. Who's ready to try? David crossed his arms. "No way. Broccoli is gross. Everyone knows that." Is this a red thought or a blue thought? This is a red thought because Professor Walker asked, "How do you know it's really gross? How do you really know, David?" David said, "I don't know. I just think it's true." Professor Walker said, "You know what's so good? What's a good time to do now? To do an experiment. Let's experiment. David hesitated, but finally he took a nibble of broccoli. He chewed slowly, and then, what did he say? He smiled. It's actually kind of crunchy and fun to eat. I think I like it. Blue thought! Everyone cheered again, because every time we have a blue thought instead of a red thought, humanity progresses and science can move forward and help us solve our problems. Well, what came next? There's a surprising discovery coming up. There's not one but two surprising discoveries in this story. And the second one, even the adults won't see coming. So next came the green soup. Everyone stared at it, wide-eyed. That looks terrifying, said Ada. Did you think it was terrifying? It probably tastes like grass, said David. Aunty Caren said, is that a red thought or a blue thought? I think that's a red thought, said David. Good job. Professor Walker asked, what do we do with red thoughts? You tell me, kids, what do we do with red thoughts? We test them. We experiment. Every child rushed to the front and said, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to test my red thought. They each dipped their spoons into the soup, cautiously tasting it. Some liked it, others didn't, but they all laughed as they shared their blue thoughts. David said, I thought it would taste like grass, but actually it's creamy and yummy. Ada said, I still don't like it, but I'm glad I tried it. Turns out, after my experiment, my blue thought was the same as my red thought, but now I know, instead of assuming. So what's the lesson, everyone? At the end of the day, Professor Walker gathered everyone around. What did we learn from our experiment? David, red thoughts aren't always right. Ada, blue thoughts help us discover new things. Aunty Caren smiled. That's exactly right. Sometimes, the food we think we won't like turn out to be our favorites. Experimenting is the best way to try and out. From then on, whenever Mia, Lucas, David, or Ada saw a new food, they remembered their red thoughts and blue thoughts, and they were always excited to experiment. So children, listen carefully. When you have a red thought and you think you won't like something, ask your parents. Ask them to help you experiment and get a blue thought to see if you might change your mind. And so, Aunty Caren and Professor Walker helped everyone discover the magic of trying new things. Before we end, are you ready for the second surprise? Well, it turns out there's a big reveal. Who's Aunty Caren? Who's Professor Walker? Well, Professor Walker is a professor at University of California, San Diego, who does research on how children learn. She does research on how people can experiment and think like a scientist. But you know what's funny? Who's Aunty Caren? Aunty Caren is also Professor Walker. You see, they can play two roles. And because Aunty Caren did her PhD and trained herself, she became Professor Walker. Because Aunty Caren used to have lots of red thoughts. But over time, with every paper she published, every study she ran, she started to test them to see if they were really red thoughts and what the blue thought looked like. And so, isn't it great that your auntie can also be a professor? Isn't it nice when people can use science to help figure out what are red thoughts and test them to see what the blue thoughts look like? So let's end here. How can we encourage children like you to apply the idea of red thoughts and blue thoughts to other areas? Like, if you have a red thought about making friends, can you run an experiment to see what your blue thought is? If you have a red thought about trying a new activity, like playing a sport or a game, can you experiment to figure out what your blue thought is? What are some fun, hands-on ways to help children experiment with foods in a way that feels like play rather than pressure? How can adults model curiosity and experimentation to inspire children to try new things? What are you going to experiment with today? What's a red thought that you're going to test with an experiment and see what the blue thought looks like? Have a great day. See you all later.